Hi there, Paul. A long time ago, in a faraway land, a young woman sought to find her father despite her mother's strong warnings not to. The young woman, Runako, had had enough of the ostracism, of the name-calling, and of the loneliness that her fatherless state had brought her, and she had listened enough when her mother had told her that not having a father was better than having an evil man as your father. So one day, after watching all the girls her age marry, and knowing that the boys were scared to approach her because of her totemlessness and ruthlessness, she packed her small rucksack, and once her mother had left for the field, she snuck out of their ramshackle homestead and took to the forest where she followed the river to find her father. But she had not walked in the forest for long when apprehension and a fear of the unknown sat like a weight in her heart. Then she thought of the bitter rejection she had faced and that she was running from, and this was far stronger that she felt it was better to go for the unknown. And as she thought of the rejection, a pinch of tears sat in the corners of her eyes. She had not thought much about Tapiwa since that fateful night, and she had promised herself not to think about him at all while she was on this journey, but the wound was just too fresh for her. She sighed again as the thought of him left her feeling weak, that she had to lean on a tree. She closed her eyes and remembered what he had said to her on the last night they had met a moon ago. It was Jenaguru, the festival of the last full moon before the rains began, and at the festival, beer was brewed, feasts were prepared, and drummers tightened the hides of their drums. For while the festival was one of merriment, it was also meant to thank the ancestors for the end of the dry season, while summoning their prowess for the incoming rainy season. So the whole kingdom went all out to ensure the success of the festival. But Janaguru was also a festival for young lovers, as many a young man would propose under the full moon, and wedding plans would be established before the month of the goat, where everyone would be full swing in the fields kicked in. All the young people would want to marry before the month of the goat, so they would begin their homes working together in the fields and towards a harvest. So Runako had been expectant this year as she had been the last 3 years. All of the young women she knew and who were her age were marrying off, and she knew that if nothing happened this Janaguru, then she would be too old to marry when the next event came. So she had prepared, spending the day soaked in a tub of fragrant potions so she would smell nice, and then applying a lotion made from fresh plants to her skin before wearing the traditional figure-hugging red cloth she had saved and bought with her own money. She knew, without a doubt, that once Tapiwa saw her, then he would melt, and she would have the best news for her mother at the end of the night. But when Tapiwa saw her, the reaction he gave her was not at all the reaction she had expected. Instead of going all agog at his lover as he had done in all the months they had been together, his looks had been sly, and he had spent the evening either excusing himself from any conversations with her or maneuvering her into corners and into shadows so they could talk. "Is anything the matter?" she had asked him under the shadows of a mohaja tree he had cornered her into. She had had to hunt him down as he had disappeared again, and she had found him lurking underneath the tree and drinking from a gulp of beer. "I can't seem to pin you down tonight." Tapiwa had laughed, alcoholic fumes escaping his mouth before he said, "And you will not pin me any other time." Runako had cocked an eyebrow and asked, "What do you mean?" "All I am just saying is I wanted to spend tonight with you and enjoy the festival with you. I don't understand what you mean by pinning you any other time." Tapiwa laughed again before his eyes turned slightly malevolent. "I see what you're trying to do, Runako, and I promise you, you will not be successful. I will not marry you. I will not propose to you at this Jinaguru or ever. Why would I do that? Especially considering that you are unfathered." "Unfathered?" was all Runako could say. Of course, she knew she had no father, and he knew that too. But in the year that they had courted, not once had he ever spoken about her parentage. Yes, the drunk Tapua responded, unfathered. You cannot be marriageable at all because no one knows where you come from, who your ancestors are, what curses your bloodline carries, and what your father's character and background is. If I should marry you, what totem will my family say you possess? Hell, what if you are my relative? No, you have no father, and I cannot take the risk of bringing you into my home. Stunned by this new revelation from the young man who had been doting on her soul, Runako asked, why did you not tell me all this before? He knew of my fatherless state well before you even courted me. Now, a year later, it is a concern to you? Why did you even waste my time and yours? Tapua laughed, and a cruel glint crossed his eyes. Because you were easy. I only had to ask you once, and you said yes that very same day. And that day we met in the forest as you collected firewood, I had been dared by my friends to approach you. But when you said yes, I couldn't pass up the opportunity for cavorting. And you know what made everything easier? The fact that you agreed for us not to meet in public but in the forest. Now no one knows of the existence of this relationship except yourself, myself, and my two friends who dared me. As the words landed into Runako's consciousness, she felt her heart tremble and then slow down. She was beginning to gasp for air, and everything around her seemed to be fading in and out of her vision. How sly the man she had fallen for was. So, gasping for air, she had asked him, did you even love me at all? His response was a loud cackle that pierced her eardrums, and not wanting to embarrass herself further, she turned and ran home. She did not remember how she got home that night, as tears had blinded her vision, and when she had stumbled into their homestead, it had been to find her mother sitting by the fireside, her eyes looking up into the sky, and hugging a cup of tea in her palms. The cup had clattered to the ground when unannounced Runako had half shouted, half growled at her, "Where is he?" Runako's mother Amai had been startled at this uncharacteristic behavior, so concern quickly rushed into her eyes as she asked her daughter, "Are you okay, Runako? What are you talking about? Did something untoward happen to you at the festival?" Amai had risen and walked towards her daughter, arms outstretched to envelop the young woman she would gladly lay down for. But Runako's hands had been quicker, violently swiping Amai's hug away as she leapt to stand as far from her concerned mother as possible. "Where is he?" Runako's growl was softer now, and the pain in her voice was evident. "Where is my father, Amai?" Amai's eyes had quickly shuttered and become expressionless, and her plump lips thinned. They had had this conversation before, and always Runako had nodded and shrugged. "As long as I have you, Amai," she would say, hugging her mother, "you are the best parent and all the parent I need." And Amai had always prayed that this understanding would always be there. But evidently, something had changed, judging from the tears that poured over Runako's cheeks and the antagonistic, arms akimbo stance she had taken. So Amai said nothing. There was nothing to say after all. The man did not exist. But Amai's silence was not what Runako wanted, so she asked again, "Amai, where is my father?" Realizing that the silence would only antagonize her daughter further, Amai sighed, then said, "Dead." Runako laughed a mirthless laugh, then said, "Take me to his grave. Take me to his family then." Amai sighed, then said, "I can see that you are not okay now, my love. How about we go to sleep now, and then tomorrow, when both you and I are calm, we can have this conversation. There is nothing I can say now that will make sense to you, but tomorrow, I promise, we will talk about it." Runako's shoulders had slumped defeatedly, and she had allowed Amai to come closer, to hug her, and then steer her to their hut where they slept on separate reed mats. Yet Runako could not sleep. How could she, when the only man who had ever showed her interest and who she had fallen for had broken her soul? She waited for her mother's breathing to even out. Then quietly she tiptoed out of their heart and went to sit by the dying fire outside. The moon was glaring down at her from its lofty westward position high up in the sky, and she found herself loathing its obnoxiousness, its mocking stare. From her position, she could hear the sounds of the festival, which would only end after the moon had sunk, and again tears began flowing down her cheeks. Unfathered. That was the word he had said, as though having a father was a cloak, and then he had been stripped of her, as though a declaration had been made that one who had been her father could no longer take that role, as though her father had been temporary and his contract had ended. She burrowed her head into her lap as the tears now became deep sobs that ravaged her thin frame. Where would she get a father now so she could become fathered? And as she cried, all the memories of her fatherlessness flooded her spirit. She had not always known how this state was a burden until she was 13 reigns old. All along, her mother had tried so hard to provide for her so that there was no gap in her life. Yes, they were poor and they lived in the poorest village in the kingdom where widowed mothers, orphaned children, and the elderly who could not work for themselves, and people with disabilities lived. In the village, people survived off the charity of the king who would send donkeys with grains and dried meats and fruits every moon, and each household would receive food that commensurated with their numbers. But not once had Amai relied on the king's charity, as she had cleared a piece of land behind their homestead and cultivated all sorts of foodstuffs for the two of them. The woman would also go into the forest and bring back the smallest beasts that they ate and shared with their neighbors. And so, even though they stayed in the poor village, they were most likely the richest amongst everyone else. And because Runako's friends were widows' daughters, the young girl had grown up believing that her father had passed too, until the day of the bloom, where all girls her age across the kingdom had been invited to the ceremony that would chart their path into maturity. Every young girl looked forward to the ceremony, where they would be taught the secrets of womanhood, and they would cross into adulthood. So excitement colored Runako's steps as she and their friends had walked to the ceremony, and when everyone had seated, the teacher, Tete, had asked them to introduce themselves by their names and clan names. When Runako stood, she said, "I am Runako Gidi of the Nengure clan. My totem is the Gondo, and we are called by the name Denga." The creases on Tete's face etched deep into her skin as she frowned at the young girl before her. Then the teacher said, "You are neither Gidi nor Gondo. Those are your mother's clan names. I know, because I grew up with your mother. What are your clan names?" Confused, Runako stood there with an overwhelming sense of stupidity crowding her mind. She could hear the other girls giggling behind her, and her eyes darted to the door and she thought of bolting. Of course, these were the names that her mother had given her, and she, Runako, had not bothered to ask what her father's names had been. Shuffling on her feet and with her voice low, she responded to Tete and said, "I don't know." The whole class erupted in laughter, including her friend Shido, and Runako had wanted to hide in shame. But even before the laughter had died down, a voice from amongst the girls shouted, "She has no father! My mother told me so!" And the laughter renewed, that even Tete's creases eased on her face and she let out a laugh. When the class had quietened, Tete said, "So how do I teach you when you do not even know your own name? How do I teach you the things of your forefathers that you should practice as you grow older? And when I group all the other girls into their clans, where will I place you?" Runako had no response except to stare at her feet. "You know what?" Tete said. How about you go back home and learn off your names while we continue with this class? And you can come back next year and start the class anew. You're still very young, and there is still many more years before you enter full womanhood. And eyes still on your feet, Runako had stepped over the sitting girls and left, never to return again as your mother had told her. Your father passed before I learnt of his names, but before he passed, he gave me this, and I think you are now old enough to possess it. Amai had untied the knot on the corner of your wrapper, and from there she retrieved a golden chain with a pendant of a flower encased in glass. Take this and keep it. It was your father's, and it shall be a reminder to you that you came from somewhere. I am sorry, but that is all I have of your father's. Trustingly, Runako had nodded and told your mother. Do you know what Tete teaches the other young girls then? Amai nodded. Of course, I have been there. Then teach me. And so Amai taught the basics of the blooming ceremony to the young girl, and Runako admitted to herself that learning from your mother was way better than learning from the sour-faced, frowning Tete. Amai's bloom lessons drew the duo even closer, that they became best friends and were forever in each other's company. Amai began taking her to excursions into the forest, where she would tell her, I want to teach you survival. Then give the young Runako a bow and an arrow or a spear, and then teach her to shoot. I can't do this, Runako had complained in the early days, and after several futile hits. Besides, Amai, this is all for boys and men. Why should I learn to hunt? Because you can, Amai would say, and in the times Runako had no motivation and called it a boy's job, Amai would ask, what do men have that you do not have, huh? Are your hands for decorative purposes? Come on, we have to get something meaty today. And with practice, Runako had grown to better her mother in the forest. She started to spend more and more time away from her childhood friends, and whenever they passed each other in the streets, she would hear them whispering, fatherless, clanless, before giggling and returning to their chores. A part of her would always want to retort, I might be fatherless, but at least I don't stand in queues to accept royal charity. My mother feeds me well. But the retort was such a mouthful that she always let it slide. And besides, she had come to accept her fatherless state because she had a mother who gave her everything. And all was well until the time came for her to marry. All the girls she knew, she had grown up with, had been picked and were welcoming first and second children, and she was still to be found until Tapua. Convulsions wrecked her thin frame again now as she sat by the fire, as two images of Tapua competed in her mind. The image of the young man who had always smiled into her eyes during their secret meetings in the forest, and the young drunken man who had laughed into her face tonight. Who was this young man? Why had he done this to her? What would he get from it? Each question was like a stab in your softest flesh, and she shuddered to it. She stood and paced up and down the length of their yard. What was she to do now? Nothing came to her mind. Tomorrow seemed like a deep gaping abyss that threatened to swallow her, and helplessness, on top of the pain, gripped her too. So when Amayu awoke in the morning, Runako was waiting for her, sitting by the now dead fire, with a haunted look in her eyes. Amai tried to give excuses when Runako asked, Where is my father? But after seeing the expressionless distance stare Runako was subjecting her to, she had sighed, then sat opposite her daughter. He is a bad man, Runako, Amai said. He is not worth your effort. That is not what I asked you, Runako said, her voice hollow and echoey. I said, Where is he? Runako saw and ignored the pinch of pain in her mother's eyes and listened as the older woman said, "He was a warrior from the nomadic tribe of Mvura. We met in the forest as I gathered fruit. He told me he was going to war in another kingdom, and he said he would be back to get me. He never came back." "What was his first name?" Runako asked. Amai looked at her daughter intently and wondered what Runako wanted to do with this information. Did she want to go and look for him, perhaps? Surely that would not be a good idea. If whatever had happened at Jinaguru last night had hurt her precious daughter, then knowing more about her father would definitely shatter her. So, with a straight face, Amai lied and said, "His name is Dombo. He is from the kingdom to our east, the Tapa kingdom. That is all I know." 2 early mornings later, in spite of her mother's commiserations, Runako had packed her rucksack and filled her quiver of arrows. Bidding her crying mother farewell, she said, "Don't worry about it, Amai. All I want to know is my heritage and my father's side of the family. I will come back soon, okay?" And cheerfully, Amai had stood at the gate to their homestead and watched her daughters retreating back as she chased the wind. When Runako returned 2 days later, she did not say a word to her mother, instead getting back to her daily chores like nothing had happened. Her heart was bleeding. Why had her mother lied? Now she had no desire for her already fragile, tender heart to be broken over and over again, and not by her mother too. So she ignored her totally. And a feeling she had never felt before for her mother surfaced, a strong sense of resentment and an anger at having been fooled by someone she had always loved, always trusted, since birth. Yes, Tapiwa had betrayed her, and that hurt. But her mother, her own mother, her best friend, the only person she, Runako, relied on, lying to her, no, that was deeper than betrayal, and in her heart, Runako cancelled Amai. When Runako had ignored her for close to a week, Amai asked her, "Are you going to be angry forever, my child?" Runako, who had been stirring her pot of sadza by the fire, stopped and turned to look at Amai, malevolence dancing in her eyes. She said nothing, then turned back to her pot. "Look," Amai said, "I know it was juvenile and foolish of me to lie to you like I did. I did all that to protect you, because I know nothing will come out of looking for your father. You will only get hurt by it." Again, Runako did not respond, so Amai asked, "Do you want to know how he and I met? Do you want to know what made us go our separate ways?" This time Runako responded and said, "So you can lie again?" Amai was quiet for a while as she stared into the sky that one might have thought she was counting the stars. Then when the silence had stretched for long, Runako mentally refusing to break it by asking what had happened, Amai had fallen. "I never gave myself to him," she said. "Yes, we were lovers, and yes, he had promised you would do right by my family and marry me, so I did not mind meeting him for our endeavors in the forest. Except one afternoon, that clandestine meeting led to force, and he took from me my pride. I was hurt. I was angry, but I knew that I was already half a woman, and no one would want me any longer. So I kept going to see him because he said he would marry, and again he belittled me over and over. And one day, I learned that I was swollen. I went to tell him. He said it wasn't his. He said I was loose. He said I should never look for him again. I tried to plead with him, to plead with the men I loved, but he called his warrior brothers, and they all laughed in my face, telling me that no, it was not their brothers. I ran home because they looked like they would attack me, and when I came back the following day, they had gone. Tents, livestock, dogs, and there was not even a single track of the direction they had gone. The air was silent after she had finished speaking, save for the spit of fire, and Runako saw a gleam of tears in Amai's eyes, and for a second she was moved. Then she remembered Amai's lies and wondered what version was the truth, so she looked away, switching off her empathy for the woman who lied. Yet Amai continued. My child, you know I come from an affluent family that has royal links, yet they turned on me when they learned of my pregnancy with you, calling me a shame and embarrassment to everybody. Do you think I would have chosen this life over the comfort of my father's home? Do you know what I have lost by coming to stay here? For 20 years, I have not spoken to any of my parents or to any of my siblings, and do you know how much that hurts? But even though I have lost my family, I gained the most beautiful creation, and that is you, my child. My child, just because I do not talk about your father does not mean you should glorify him. He is not a good man, and I hope you are not thinking of finding him, because you will hurt you and me again for the second time. Runako rolled her eyes in the darkness. This story, were it true, had another side, and she wanted to hear it directly from her father. She knew too that whatever plan she made now towards finding a father, there was no need to involve Amai ever, and if she ever found a father, then there would be no need to return to this kingdom. She was willing to start afresh in a new land and reclaim her life. The desire to find a father gripped her heart even tighter when the news of the proposals that had taken place at the Jenaguru started filtering into their village. Runako listened, trying to hide the envy in her eyes as she learned of how most of the girls who were her age had been propositioned to, and of the Roora preparations that were being held in various homes to celebrate the impending marriages. She knew, even before anyone had told her, that Tapua had also propositioned that night. She did not bother to find out who the young woman was, knowing that now was not the time to hurt herself further. But what the news had done was spur her on the journey to find her father and escape and start life anew. Tapua and Amai belonged to the past, and this was the future. So she had solidified the plan to see the soothsayer that she had hatched on her way back from trying to find her father. As she had crossed the forest back to home, almost resigning herself to the fate of a single life, a thought whispered the soothsayer's name in her head, and Runako had halted in her tracks. Yes, that had to be the solution. The old woman who could see the past, the present, and the future, and who sat in a dingy, run-down hut by the edge of the kingdom, was a solution. Surely the woman would know who her father was and how Runako could get there. Runako had been impressed by the soothsayer the moment she had walked into the dingy hut, when a shaky voice reverberated across the walls and said, "The fatherless one is here, looking for her roots." Runako had not even opened her mouth, and yet the old crone knew who she was and why she was there. Runako had to search the dim room to find the source of the voice, and it took a while as everything seemed to blend with the walls. Then when she was about to give up, she saw a human frame heaving slowly as it breathed in and out. Runako squinted and could barely see the bony frame, the face deep set with wrinkles, and eyes that seemed shut as though she was sleeping. Sighing in relief that she was not talking to a spirit, Runako spoke as she settled down. "Yes, I am looking for my father." The crone was silent for a while, and Runako thought she had dozed off, what with the shallow, steady breathing and the closed eyes. She was about to ask again for assistance when the older woman said, "Hush, patience, my child. I communicate with the elders." Then after such a long time that Runako was convinced it was nightfall, the soothsayer spoke and said, "Child, stirring a honeycomb invites stings." Runako shrugged and said, "I just want to know where my father is. Is he alive?" The soothsayer cleared their phlegmy throat and said, "Child, before you undertake this journey, I want you to know that no sane parent abandons their offspring. Abandoning a child comes from a dark soul, because how can a person eat, laugh, live without knowing whether their own loin eats, laughs, and lives? Child, journeys like these do not bring closure. They open fissures that will become too difficult to heal. Child, where you are now is where love blooms. The unknown should be a mystery to you." Runako, voice shaky from refusal to listen to the soothsayer's advice, said, "Seer, do you know your own father?" The seer nodded in the dimness, and Runako said, "I hear what you say, but you have known your father, and that is all I ask for. I do not want to go and stay in his home and eat his food and live happily ever after with him. I just want to know where I come from and who I am. Just that. Do you want to help me or not?" "He lives," the seer said, "in a valley to the north, where rain never ceases all year long. He lives in a line of msasa trees. He lives." Runako's heart was beating so excitedly, so quickly that she almost stood and rushed to hug the crone. But seeing the seer's eyes looking at her so brightly in the dimly lit room, she restrained herself and said, "Thank you, seer," before rummaging in her pocket for a coin and rising, going to place the coin in a plate by the door and shouting, "Bye, seer." She heard the seer's hollowy response, "Be careful, child," as she sped back to her home. In her mind, she knew she was going to see her father and solve the mystery of her background once and for all. She was leaving this miserable village to once and for all start a life for herself. It took her less than 2 days to learn of the kingdom of the valley called Mvura, and with careful questions, she had learnt too of how a person would be able to get there. It took her longer to pick, however, as she knew the journey would take her 5 days, and even though she knew the forest, she still wanted to be prepared for any eventuality. She would secrete a bag of nuts into the forest during the day while her mother was not watching. She sharpened her spear surreptitiously by the ruare, where the stone gave blades a sharper edge, and when her mother caught her in the act and raised her eyebrows, saying, "I thought you preferred the bow and the arrow to the spear," Runako had quickly said, "Yes, but still a girl has to carry a sharp spear in case there is an attacker nearby." And exactly a moon after Jinaguru, Runako sneaked her rucksack into the forest and stuffed all her goods into it. "Tomorrow," she said to herself, a thrill of both fear and excitement running down her body. "Tomorrow we leave." The next morning, her heart broke a little when her mother bade her farewell before the woman left for the fields. But then she thought of the years with her father that the woman had stolen, and Runako felt some sense of vindication. Amai would pay for her deception, first for lying that her father had died, then for lying about his whereabouts. Yes, the woman was better off here, stewing in her misery and her regret, and she, Runako, would set off to find her father and perhaps start a new life far away from this kingdom she had grown to loathe. The first 2 days of the journey were arduous as Runako, who walked clutching the pendant her mother had given her when she was a young girl, had not walked for long when she began to venture into territories unwalked, unventured, and untouched. She fought through bramble and thorn and dense bush, wildflowers and thick opaque cobwebs, and all this with her eyes and ears wide open. While a part of her knew it was wiser to find paths often trodden, she also knew that a lone young woman on the road would attract barbarians and attacks, and thus she was far better off alone. All she knew was that she had to follow the river, and as long as she could hear its sounds in the distance, she was on the right path. She walked with the mid-morning breeze on her back, then with the scorcher of a sun in her eyes at midday, and then with a late afternoon drizzle, not daring to stop, but wanting to get to her father quicker. But also, she knew she wanted to find a place to settle before the sun set, and the bramble and bushes would only expose her to slithering animals. So it was with luck that she found a clear glade at dusk. There, she unburdened herself of the backpack and jumped into the chilly water, wincing at first, then letting her body acclimatize to its chilliness and allowing its refreshing coolness to seep into her tired joints. When she was done, she unfurled her blanket and wrapped herself over and over before hitting the ground and falling asleep, clutching the pendant in her pocket, and woke at daybreak. The journey continued, and for 3 days she worked herself upriver, avoiding human settlements and hugging nature as to get to her destination in one piece. Each step brought with it a thrill in her, and a part of her felt like she was on her way to find her true calling. But yet, no matter how much she tried to dismiss it, her mother's sad face danced before her every few steps, and Runako could not help but feel guilty. She tried not to wonder how your mother was now and failed. She knew, even from this far, that Amai was shattered and that she had not gone back to the field since the morning she had found her only child gone. She knew Amai had not confided in anyone, not wanting to deal with another shameful and embarrassing incident, especially regarding her fatherless daughter, and now she would be in mourning all alone. The thoughts made Runako falter, and a part of her wanted to go back home and get her mother's forgiveness and blessing. But then she thought of home and how the prospects of a forever spinster life loomed over her, what with no father's name. So sighing, she prayed a prayer of protection over her mother and picked on step after step, hoping that perhaps if she saw her father, he would be unmarried and she would not only find a father, but find her mother a lover too. And whispering, she said to the forest and its inhabitants, "Of course I will return Amai. I was just too angry then." And Runako traipsed forward in bramble and wildflower, adder and unseen mammal, towards the unknown. But an otherwise uneventful journey was disturbed on the fourth morning. As usual, the previous day, as the sun began to set, Runako had found a small space in which she had to rest. She knew that she was getting closer, as people had said it was a 5-day journey. She also knew that it was time to venture out of the shadows to ask where she was in case she somehow wound up lost. With those resolutions in her mind, she had wrapped herself in a blanket and fallen asleep on a warm ruare stone. But when she awoke, she was not sleeping on a stone, but she was moving in the air, and it took her moments to realize that she was being carried in someone's arms. A part of her wanted to scream, to break free, to run, but she knew it would be unwise because she was in unfamiliar territory and did not know who was carrying her and how strong or fast they were, and also did not know how many they were. All she knew was that the person who was carrying her was a man, and he did so effortlessly, and thus he was strong. Scrambling in her mind, she tried to feel for the spear she wore by her waist, but her waist felt incredibly empty. But at least she could feel the pressing of the pendant to her waist. Whoever this was had stripped her of her weaponry. Where was your rucksack? Where was your survival pack? Where was she being taken to? By who? And why? And most importantly, how could she escape? But she was disturbed out of these thoughts when a voice emitted from her carrier and said softly, "And so the Mermaid awakens. That's good. It's been a long hour, and I was beginning to think I was carrying a corpse." Runako did not know what to be stunned with, the softness of the voice, or the fact that he knew she was awake. For a while, she decided to feign sleep because she still did not know who carried her. But the soft voice laughed and said, "I know you are awake, so don't try that." He stopped mid-step, then said, "In fact, let me put you down so you can tell me who you are and what a lovely lady like you is doing alone in the forest at this time of the night." The stranger put her down, and Runako, weaponless, yet seeing her opportunity to escape, made to dash into the woods. But before her first foot hit the ground in flight, the stranger's hand had grabbed hold of her upper arm and said, "Don't waste your energy. This is my turf, and whatever direction you take, I will stop you. Now, speak. Who are you? Where are you from? What brings you here to my area? Have you been sent?" Barely controlling her anger and frustration, Runako spoke through her teeth and said, "Let me go on my way, and I will not disturb you further." The men laughed and said, "Who sent you? Are you a spy?" Knowing that the men would not easily let go of Runako, sighed and said, "I am no spy, say. Otherwise, why else would ye have found me sleeping and not scouting? What kind of spying is that? Sir, please, let me go. I have come from far, and I don't know how much of my journey I still have before me." The men laughed and said, "I am no fool. I was not born yesterday. Come along, it's night now, and there is not much we can talk about. Tomorrow, when it's light and we can see you, then my people and I will resume this conversation." The man's grip was strong and decisive as it stirred her towards the unknown. Defeated from not having weapons to fight with and tired from having walked long distances, Runako gave up and allowed the stranger to lead her. Perhaps, she thought as they walked, if she told him and his people who she was and what her journey was about, they would help her and lead her exactly towards where she was going. When they arrived at a small camp in the middle of the forest, the strange man aroused the camp, and Runako saw torches being waved in front of her face and curious gazes of mostly men peering at her. Then the stranger, who still gripped her arm, called forth a buff woman and said, "Take care of her tonight. Make sure she does not escape. Tomorrow she will explain who she is." When Runako awoke the next morning, it was to find herself in a tent that she did not even remember entering because of her tiredness. Alarmed, she scrambled up and rushed to the door, but the entrance was blocked by three burly women chewing cane sugar and who looked up at the presence of the girl behind them. "Ah, she is awake," one of the burly girls said, "right in the middle of the morning like a queen." The other two women laughed as Runako looked around. Sure, it was mid-morning, a testament to how tired she had been when she had gone to sleep. But she looked further around to take it all in, and she realized immediately that she was in the middle of a warrior camp, with most of the inhabitants being young men of brute proportions, with some sharpening tools, others polishing shoes, and at another end, some taking part in target practice. There were few women in the camp too, but they too looked like warriors, what with burly physiques, thundering steps, and black and white paint across their borders. Where was this? She wondered. "Where am I?" she asked the guards. "What is this place?" The guards laughed, and then one rose and said, "Let me alert the prince." Another guard shoved a plate into her hands and said, "The prince said you should eat up. Quick with it. You don't know when you will have your next meal." It did not take long for Runako to be led to the makeshift court where all the warriors had formed a half moon and were sitting on the ground, their hands on their spears and swords. There was a sense of danger in the air, and for the first time, Runako felt scared for herself. But even before the fear had time to settle in, her eyes had immediately drawn themselves to the centerpiece of the court, the most handsome young man she had seen, sitting on a reed chair and flanked by two sentries on each side. He was dark-skinned and sable, and Runako was not sure if it was the midday sun that made his skin velvety. His features were chiseled, like the Mecca had taken time with the nose, the cheekbones with the mouth. But it was his presence that spoke, as he had the body of a giant that brooked no argument as to his strength. For a moment, Runako faltered, but his gaze was on her, as though commanding her to draw closer, and her feet, as though controlled by his eyes, obeyed. It was his eyes that then gave her the command to stop, and everything else, everyone else around her, ceased to exist. But when he spoke, Runako froze, for his voice was the voice of the man who had carried her in the forest and brought her to this camp. Young woman, the now gruff voice which belonged to Prince Tonderai said, "Who are you, and what brought you into our territory?" For a heartbeat, Runako stood transfixed, hardly believing that this man had carried her, had spoken to her, and she had been in his proximity. But then she looked at him again and saw the impatience in his eyes, so she said nothing but the truth. "I am Runako Gidi. My mother comes from the Nengure clan, and we are a people of the Soso kingdom down south. I am on a journey up north. A journey I believe I am close to arriving at, and there I seek my father who I have never met. I seek my father so that I know my identity, and I gain acceptance within my kingdom." "And who is your father? And from what clan does he come from?" Prince Tonderai asked, his face lined with fierceness. "All I know is that he is from the kingdom of Mvura, and he lives by the Msasa trees. His name would be Dombo, if I am not mistaken." A hush, so painful that it was loud, fell across the court. No one moved, and even the prince stared at Runako as though she was crazy. Then he swallowed and signaled for his guards and the rest of the warriors to drop their weaponry. Turning to Runako, he said, "You are indeed no spy, as you never have mentioned the name Dombo so casually in this court." Runako's face perked up and she asked excitedly, "You know him? You know my father?" Prince Tonderai chuckled, a wry chuckle. "Of course." Then sighing, he said, "Are you sure you want to meet this man?" "Yes," Runako said. "Please give me directions if you know where I can find him, and allow me to be on my way. I do not wish to inconvenience you longer than I have already done." For a long moment, the prince stared at the beautiful young woman who stood before him before he looked at the sentries standing around him and beckoning them closer. After they had conferred for a while and disbanded, the prince then turned to Runako and said, "Runako, we are willing to give you directions and let you be on your way, but we have seen the state in which you are in, the scratches on your body from walking in the wild, and the stress in your eyes. My camp and I are willing to give you respite and rest for a day or two, for we know that the journey before you is not only tough, but is also uncertain, but only if that is okay with you." Runako, despite the urgency to get to her father now, could feel the tiredness that was dragging her body down. She looked around at the people before her, and she somehow knew that they would not hurt her. So despite the urgency in her soul, she decided to listen to her body, nodding and saying, "That is fine. Thank you for your hospitality. I will resume my journey tomorrow." She knew that this was not the state in which she wanted to meet her father. Tired, dirty, scratched. She needed to make a good first impression, so she allowed the two women warriors to lead her to the kitchen, where she got a hot meal and accepted too their offer to go to the stream for a wash. She slept the afternoon away, and when she awoke, the sun was setting, and yet another meal had been brought for her. She was still eating when a visitor entered her tent, Prince Tonderai. Seeing him, she shivered, as being in the presence of such a handsome man had made the late afternoon cooler. He had such a shadow, such a presence, that she could not help but feel in awe of him. "So tell me, what do you know about your father?" was what he asked her as they sat down after they had exchanged greetings. "Nothing," Runako responded. "My mother has never talked about him at all. For the longest time, I grew up believing that he had passed, and it has only been recently that I learned that he is alive. But when I said his name, I saw the expressions that went through all your faces. You know him, don't you?" Yes, was all Tonderai said. When a long silence had passed and he had not offered anything else, Runako asked him, "What is he like?" Tonderai's smile was wry, and he then said, "I have no experience of him as a father, so you might be a good father." "What experience of him do you have then?" she asked him. Again Tonderai was quiet. Then he sighed and said, "Look, I admire you and your bravery. It must have been difficult, walking all the way here, all alone, from your kingdom, and look at you. You did it. I could tell you about your father, but what good will it be now that you are so close to him? Look, go to your father, and if things work out for you, great. But if ever, after you meet him and you want to hear my side of the story, I will be open to it." Runako wanted to tell him to go ahead anyway. She wanted to learn what kind of man he was, what he looked like, and what his business was. But she saw how tightly Tonderai was about the whole affair, and she let it go and asked him, "They call you Prince. Are you a real prince or is that an assumed role? Where are you from?" Tonderai smiled and said, familiar territory. Yes, I am a real prince, only that I am the fifth son of my father, and therefore no royal role has been assigned to me. So I decided to take charge of our military arm, and my father was all too happy to have a son leading his army. "Is your kingdom close by?" she asked him. "Not very far, about half a morning's walk from here," he responded. "And why are you here in the forest?" she asked again. Tonderai sighed and said, "Our kingdom has suffered brutal attacks from a strong band of bandits up north. In our last encounter, the bandits decimated our army and left the kingdom almost defenseless, which is why we then had to recruit strong young men and women and come and train here and any other place we set camp." Runako nodded and said, "I am sorry for your losses." He smiled at her and then said, "I hope you won't be sorrier in the future." Then peering outside and not allowing her to question his cryptic message, he stood and said, "It is getting late outside. I will leave you to rest tonight. I have to warn you though that this is a military camp, and if it happens that you are awoken in the middle of the night to either fight or flee, you will have to obey orders. For now, sleep well and see you in the morning." And when he left, Runako remained staring at the door he had exited from, taking deep breaths to inhale his scent, and wondering why her recently heartbroken soul was falling for a stranger, and why her body was feeling all tingly. But by the time she awoke the following morning, she had sobered up, and a sense of trepidation had gripped her heart. The guard who had awoken her at dawn had told her that if she set out this early morning, by mid-afternoon, she would have arrived in her father's village. But what was in her mind now was her mother's advice and thoughts of her obviously shattered parent. As she thought of her mother, Runako's heart fell. Had she been hasty in leaving home? What if her mother was right, and she found that her father was a bad man? Should she have listened? But the doubt had not crept in too hard when Tonderai arrived, with two female warriors walking beside him. After they had exchanged greetings, Tonderai said, "My advisors have agreed that we cannot let a young woman go alone up north as the roads may be treacherous and you might encounter bandits. So I and my two warriors, Shamiso and Tendai, will accompany you on the journey." Runako was overjoyed. She knew having some company would ease the pressure on her mind, and thus they set off. Shamiso and Tendai leading the pack, and Tonderai in the rear, sandwiching Runako in between them. This leg of the journey was easier for Runako, as she did not walk in brambles and thorns as her guides knew safer yet walkable paths. And before she knew it, it was afternoon, and she could see the well-trodden paths zigzagging through the forest. They were now close to human habitation. When they got close to a huge baobab tree, her guides halted and Tonderai spoke. "We cannot go further than this, Runako, as this land is an enemy land to us. You, go on along and find what you came for. I wish you good fortune and a great reunion with your father. Shamiso, one of the guides, handed her weaponry and wished her luck. Then Tonderai spoke again. It is too late for us to return to our camp tonight, so we will camp around here for the night. Should you need any assistance between tonight and tomorrow early morning, come back here, and we shall see you and assist you. Runako nodded and said, Thank you for everything. Tonderai nodded too. The greatest thank you will come from you not betraying our whereabouts and our camp to your new family. Can we count on you? When Runako nodded again, Tonderai smiled and said, Go on then. May the Maker favor you and your father as you reconcile. Runako took turns shaking her guide's hands and thanking them. Then she turned on her heel and sighed before taking the first step towards knowing her other parent. She did not take long to find Dombo, for the first person she had met as she stepped into the village had looked her all over with suspicion before pointing to the center of the village by the outskirts. His house stands in the middle of the square, and it is difficult to miss as it is the most intricate and the loftiest home in the square. And Runako had hurried on, heart beating in tandem with her footsteps, asking every seventh person about Dombo, being given the same dark stare before being told where his residence was. And yet the descriptions she had gotten had not prepared her for the majesty of the house that stood before her. It was one large home, and not the cluster of huts she was used to, giving the home a look of affluence and excellent architectural design. Red, pink and yellow hues lined the walls, and these danced to the sun that was beginning to set. And yet it was the outer perimeter that spoke of the wealth of the men who lived here, a perimeter not made of long sticks and roughly hewn thread, but made of iron poles and wires that miners fetched huge sums of money for. And behind it, just like the soothsayer had said, a line of msasa trees danced in the breeze. Runako had arrived. For a moment, Runako wanted to turn back and go home. There is no way the man who gave birth to me stays here, she kept telling herself. And yet a part of her was already driving her feet forward. She had come this far. Of course, she had to know if this was her father. So rubbing her golden pendant in her pocket for luck, she approached the gates. But just as she did, a donkey-drawn cart came to a halt at her feet, and Runako watched a young woman, slightly younger than her, disembark. An older woman, carrying baskets, disembarked too, and Runako guessed that she was the maid servant. When she turned to look again at the young woman, Runako found the girl staring at her, her nose upturned and disdain dancing in her eyes. Who are you? The younger woman said, and what brings you to my father's doorstep? Are you perhaps lost? No, Runako responded. I am looking for Dombo of the Mvura clan. The younger woman laughed, taking a sweeping look over Runako again, before saying to the maidservant who seemed burdened by the baskets, Every day a burgher turns up to our homestead. I have told Baba to stop with his philanthropy to poor people several times, but he does not listen. She then beckoned to one of the guards standing by the gate, who almost bowed to the ground before her. Strip this one of her weaponry and take her to Baba. And with a swell of her long dresses, she walked away. Runako allowed the guards to take her weapons and then lead her into the homestead. She did not even get enough time to look around, for she had immediately seen the man sitting on a majestic chair in a shed, his heavily bejeweled fingers holding a chunk of water lemons to his lips, while two young women stood on either side, fanning him down. Runako's heart stilled a bit. Her father. This man was her father. She had finally found him. Ah, another one, the man said, his eyes running up and down Runako's form in an appraising manner that made Runako uneasy. Bring here some grain, guard. And you, he now beckoned at Runako with his pudgy fingers. Come closer. What brings you here? Is your brother sick? Has your crop failed? Are your children hungry? Or you just want to take advantage of my hospitality? He turned to one of the ferning girls and said, These people have lies every day, before he burst out laughing. Runako, growing uneasy by the heartbeat, drew closer, debating in her mind whether to state the purpose of her visit or not. And as she drew closer, her eyes were drawn to the folds covering his throat and the flower pendant that peeped out of the folds. She felt in her pockets, and hers was there, and she was relieved, for the one the man wore was exactly identical to hers. It was him, the man who had fathered her. She was quiet for a while as her mind scrambled, and as she watched him look unashamedly at her over and over. This was her father? Then your mouth, without even direction from your brain, opened and spoke. I am your daughter, say. My mother is. But the man burst out laughing so hard that Runako feared for a moment he would burst out of the seams of his skin. Another one? Another phony one wanting to scam me? It will not work, woman, because countless others have tried before and failed. Guards? He clicked his drum-like fingers, and two men rushed forward. But Runako was quicker, for in that moment she shoved her hand into her pocket and produced a pendant which she dangled in the air. She saw the involuntary bulge of his eyes as he recognized the pendant, and she hoped that the flicker would be enough for him to remember her at least. My mother gave this to me, she shouted, hope creeping in her voice. She said that you gave this to her as a promise to marry, but then you left. I am Runako, sir, and I am the result of the collision you had with my mother over 24 reigns ago. I am your daughter, sir. She finished as the guards took hold of her on either side, but did not move. So your mother is not just a liar, but she's also a thief, the pudgy man said, because that pendant is indeed mine, and there are only two of those in this world, for they belonged to my father. I have searched for that for years, and yet you have had it, daughter of a thief. My mother is not a thief, Runako shouted, her voice getting more and more helpless. She says you gave her this as Antuma. Please, sir, I am your daughter. I do not desire much, but to have my ro'ora paid to my mother's family so that I get to have a name and an identity. Please. She made as if to throw herself to the ground to beg, but the two guards held her firmly. The pudgy man continued to laugh. See, he said to no one in particular, all they want is a payment, a ro'ora, nothing else, just a hand in my hard-earned treasures. God, give me my pendant and throw the impostor outside. Runako fought, gnashing and gnarling at the guards who were attempting to pry the pendant out of her fingers. An almost superhuman strength had possessed her, and the guards could not hold her. But eventually they succeeded, prying the golden chain out of her hands and tugging it from her so hard that the chain broke and the glass surrounding the golden flower shattered as the pendant fell to the ground. And yet the pudgy man was shouting, Take her out, escort her as far as possible, and if you, impostor, or your mother ever try to come here again, then I will show you the brutish power that has earned me a name and this village home. Go, take yourself as far from here as possible. But Runako would not let him have the last word, as she began spewing curses and shouts at him as she was dragged on her knees to the gate. Imbecile, she shouted. Fool, failure, idiot. The rage in her spirit making her repeat the same words over and over again, until the gates were opened before her and she was shoved outside. She stood outside for a long moment, staring at the gates that had shut her out of her dreams. There was no feeling in her, as if someone had entered and emptied her heart. All that was left was a hollowness, an emptiness. She ignored the ebb of foot traffic that flowed around her and stared at the gates, hoping they would open for her again. But as darkness began to slither to usher in night, the numbness thawed and feeling returned. A voice, so raw and so bitter she had never known existed in her, grabbed her throat and she let it out, and with it an ocean of tears torrented out of her eyes. Blindly, she turned and began running towards the forest, the sound from her throat now guttural and anguished. And as she ran, people stopped their walks and stared at the strange young woman until she was out of their sight, and they were shaking heads, some with sadness, some with pity, and others with a curiosity as to what was happening. She ran into the forest, rage propelling her feet, and only once she got to the baobab tree did she stop, the fire in her lungs almost like a catharsis, like a release from the pent-up hurt in her heart. She stood underneath the tree for a long while, heaving and sobbing, looking around for the prince and the other guides. As she was almost giving up on not finding them, she felt a warm hand on her shoulder and she wailed. It was Tonderai, and seeing his grim yet reassuring face, she melted, and her legs buckled under her feet. But he held her and drew her close to his chest, where she sobbed for an eternity. When she was finally coherent, he said, "Let's go to the others," and led her through dense bush to a cove where Tendai and Shamiso and two other warriors she had not seen before sat before a fire. "This is our Mvura outpost," Tonderai said, after he had introduced the other two. "They are the ones who are watchmen and alert us of anything suspicious that might arise." Runako nodded, hardly hearing him, but still grateful that she was not alone, especially now, at this moment. Shamiso handed her a cup of Zumbani tea seasoned with honey and said, "Drink, it will calm you." And grimacing, as though it were poison, Runako drank. It was a long while before anyone spoke, and it was she, Runako, who broke the silence and told them all that had transpired. And once she had purged herself, she said, "I want to return home. I want my mother now." She was sobbing again, and Tentai was holding her and rocking her as if she were a baby. Tonderai then spoke and said, "Of course, we will accompany you home." Then he cleared his throat and he said to her, "I knew, we all knew that this would happen. Dombo is not known for his kindness, and the rumors of him from around here paint him as a bloodthirsty, banditing tyrant. This man is perhaps the most feared of all men in all the kingdoms around. He has made his wealth through plundering kingdoms, raiding their livestock pens, and kidnapping their daughters for sport. And in his rampages, he has also plundered women, leaving his seed scattered across the world. He has taken no responsibility for the terror he has reigned across nations, and the few times kingdoms have approached him to negotiate peace, he has declared war against them. We would have dissuaded you from going ahead with this journey, but there was so much decisiveness in your stance that we had to allow you to go along with it and see for yourself. I am sorry about what you went through, though." Runako nodded, even as any movement of her head brought with it cramps. "My mother was right. She told me he is a bad man. I don't even know how I will face her." Shamiso spoke. "Yes, your mother was right, but I am sure there is a well in your heart that brims with love for you. She will be waiting. She will forgive you." They set off early the next morning, and even though Runako's heart was heavy, she could not help but laugh at Shamiso and Tendai's infectious camaraderie as they walked. They slept in the camp that night, and Runako had to force her mind to calm for her to sleep through. The following day, Tonderai, Tendai, and Shamiso woke up early to accompany Runako back. It was an uneventful journey, and this time they used safer routes and took refuge in real homes at night. And with each passing day and night, Runako felt comfortable with the three of them, that she felt that for the first time she had made real friendships. And because the journey had been light, Runako felt better after seeing the men who had fathered her. But as she got closer to their home, a sense of trepidation and fear gripped her again. What would their mother say? Would she forgive Runako for the betrayal? Would they mend the relationship? Do you want us to go with you, or are you fine going into your homestead alone? Tondere asked as they reached the outskirts of the village. Scared of going in alone, Runako said, "Can you come with me?" "Of course," all three said, and together they walked into the village. The first thing that Runako noticed as they approached the homestead was her mother's gauntness and her sunken cheekbones as she stared upward by the fire. The woman had lost weight, and Runako's guilt returned full force. A part of her wanted to bolt, but by then her mother had lifted her head and seen her. The woman opened her mouth in exclamation, and as though in slow motion, dropped her cooking stick, rose, appended the three-legged pot that she had been stirring, its content quickly extinguishing the fire, and ran. But as she was running towards Runako, arms outstretched, and Runako was running towards her too, arms outstretched, the two women collided as tears flowed down their cheeks. There was no need for words. Every unspoken thing was clear, and every wrong had been righted in that moment. And later, after introductions had been made, and Amai had scurried around to make a meal for her daughter's guardian angels, and everyone had eaten their full, Tonderai spoke. "Thank you, Amai, for opening your doors and welcoming us fully. But we have been away from our camp for too long, and we should set out now if we are to reach the next kingdom if it is still light." Amai nodded and shook each of their hands in turn, and saying a meaningful thank you to them. "May the Maker go with you always. May he bless you, my children," she said. "You too, Amai," and they rose. "You are not accompanying us?" Tonderai asked Runako, and she too rose. She had walked with them to the edge of the village when Tendai and Shamiso hugged her and said, "See you soon," before walking away. Tonderai stood before her and smiled at her. "I would like to see you again soon," he said, his eyes not leaving hers. "Do you think there is space in your heart for silly old me?" Runako smiled at him as the hardness that had congealed around her in the past 2 weeks told. "But I don't have a father and a name, you know that. Would that be an issue for you?" He smiled. "Not at all, because you have a resilient heart and a beautiful demeanor, and you also have a mother." Their smile grew wider and she said, "I would be glad to see you again." He took her hands in his and said, "See you soon then," before patting her shoulder and walking into the forest. Runako stood for a while, watching the density of the forest swallow him, before smiling to herself and turning to go back home. The end. Thank you for watching. I hope you liked this one, and if you did, please let me know in the comments below or with a thumbs up. Also, if you haven't subscribed, please do click the subscribe button below. Thank you and lots of love. Bye.